The voicemail clicked off, and the silence in my truck was heavy. I just sat there, the engine ticking under the hood while my coffee went cold. My name is Yolanda Doyle. I am 33, and that morning my father used a voicemail to tell me I was officially out of the family. I played it once. I did not play it twice. His voice was flat, and underneath it, I could hear his new wife Sharon whispering something. "You are out," he said. "Do not come back. We are moving on without you." I stared at the screen for a long minute, then typed back one word. Okay. What none of them remembered while they were busy moving on without me was who actually held the keys to everything they were standing on. By the next morning, I had 46 missed calls. I will get to those. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where quiet people keep receipts and boundaries land harder than any shouting match. If you have ever been the one holding everything together, right up until they decided you were disposable, stick with me, because you will want to hear how this ends. Today, you and I are going to unpack exactly how it happened. Let me back up. I run a bookkeeping shop on Main Street in Harmons Mill, Ohio, where the population is just under 4,000. I do payroll for the feed store, filings for 2 churches, and books for half the farms in the county. People call me when the numbers stop adding up, when an IRS letter makes their hands sweat, or when a relative disappears with a loan. I am the one who reads the fine print out loud and slow. It turns out my own family was a number that had not added up in a long time. I learned this business the hard way. I was 20 when my mother got sick, and I left school to drive her to Columbus 3 days a week, 90 minutes each way, a thermos between us. I taught myself tax law at her kitchen table because someone had to make sense of the paperwork and the lawyers charged by the question. My mom, Carol, had dirt under her nails and a great head for figures. She taught me that a ledger never lies, even when people do. When the cancer came back, she sat me down at that table and made me the sole trustee of the family trust. Not my father, me. The trust held the farm, 160 acres, and the old farmhouse my great-grandfather built with his own hands. I did not understand why she chose me over her husband back then. I figured she was just being practical because I was the one who read the documents twice. I would find out the real reason later, but not for 2.5 years. Not until the morning everything fell apart. When my mother died on a Tuesday in October, my father, Roy Doyle, came undone. They had been married for 36 years. He did not know how to make coffee, which bills were on auto pay, or where the spare keys were. For about a year, I drove the 12 miles out to the farm every other day just to keep him on his feet. I balanced his checkbook, refilled his medicine, and sat with him through the hardest nights, the holidays, her birthday, and the empty quiet of that old house. I told myself this was just what daughters did. I did not mind because under all that heavy grief, he was still my dad. Near the end, my mother told me her worst fear was leaving him behind, soft-hearted and alone. She said a lonely man with valuable land is a target, and she would not be there to stand between him and the wrong person. I thought she was just tired. Then he met Sharon at a church potluck, and they married 13 months after the funeral. It happened so fast the neighbors were still bringing casseroles. Sharon Voss was 54, twice divorced, sharp-eyed, and friendly in the way of people who always count the exits. She moved in, and 3 weeks later her grown son, Brett, moved into my old bedroom with his motorcycle parts on the porch. I tried to be glad for him. I really did. My lonely father had someone in his life again, and that should have been a good thing. But something curdled in my dad during that first winter, and it took me a while to put a name to it. He started saying things like, "Your mother left this place to you and not to me," as if I am just a renter on my own farm. He would say it lightly, the way people say things they have been chewing on for months. Sharon never argued with him when he said those things. She just nodded slowly and let the tension hang in the room. I would catch her watching me whenever I came over with the quarterly financial statements. It was not unkind, she was just measuring me up. I should have measured her back. The new house in town was entirely Sharon's idea. By spring, that dream house had a name and a price. A 4-bedroom place on Cedar Street asking $240,000, with a porch Sharon claimed reminded her of her childhood. They wanted to sell the back 40 acres of the farm to pay for it, but that land was not theirs to sell. It belonged to the trust, which meant it legally belonged to my mother's wishes, and I was the one holding the pen. I did not want a family war, so I bent. I offered to put $60,000 of my own money toward their down payment as a gift, no strings attached, just to make the math work without touching the land. I told them we could look at a partial sale if we did it by the book, with an appraisal and a sit-down with the lawyer. That is just how you avoid getting sued. I even called Gwen Hollis, the lawyer who helped my mother set the trust up, to start the paperwork the right way. But Sharon did not hear a yes. She only heard delay. One evening over pot roast, she set a stack of papers by my plate and said, "Smooth as butter. Your mother is dead, honey, and this is our family now." My dad just studied his fork, while her son Brett smirked into his phone. I felt the temperature in that kitchen drop 10 degrees. I understood then that my signature was not a safeguard to them. It was just a formality they expected me to perform, like passing the rolls. The trouble was, I had read that trust 100 times. I knew a formality was the one thing it would never be. It all came to a head over that dinner, exactly 2 weeks before their closing date. I did not know yet that they had already put $15,000 down in earnest money. Sharon slid the sale agreement across the table and tapped the signature line with one polished nail. "We just need you to sign here," she said. "The closing is the 18th. My dad finally looked up. "It is all arranged, Yolanda," he said. "Dale drew it up." Dale Puitt was my father's golf buddy of 20 years, who happened to have a law license. I kept my voice even and told them I could not sign this tonight. Sharon's smile did not budge. "Why on earth not?" "Because it is trust land," I said. "There is a legal process, an appraisal, and a real valuation. I am not allowed to just sign it away because it is convenient, and honestly, Dad, neither of us wants me to do that." He was the other beneficiary of the trust. I was protecting him too, whether he could see it or not. The kitchen went dead quiet, except for the clock ticking over the stove. Brett muttered something about me thinking I was better than everybody else. Sharon slowly set down her fork. "So, you are going to hold up your father's whole life over paperwork?" she asked. "Over my mother's instructions," I said. "It is not the same thing." My dad's jaw worked, but he did not say a word. That was the part that hollowed me out. Not their anger, but his silence. I kept my pen and set it down beside her stack of papers. "Thank you for dinner," I said. Then I drove the 12 miles back to town, my headlights cutting through the empty county roads, and I did not cry, because crying never balanced a ledger. My dad called the next morning at 6:40, while I was parked outside my shop with the lights still off. I did not pick up, so it went to voicemail. That is the message I told you about at the start. I want you to hear it exactly the way I did, sitting cold in my truck before coffee. Yolanda, we talked it over, he said. You are out. Do not come back. We are moving on without you. And then, faint and almost swallowed by the static, Sharon whispered in the background, "Tell her about the trust." There was a pause, and then my dad's voice came back, lower. "We will deal with the trust." Click. I sat with my thumb hovering over the screen, feeling that quiet stillness that settles over you when someone you love hands you a betrayal you can never unreceive. I did not shake, and I did not get loud. Instead, I read his words back in my head the way I would analyze an IRS tax notice, looking closely for what the text actually said beneath what it was meant to threaten. We will deal with the trust, he had said, as if it were theirs to deal with. I typed out one word, the only honest response I had. Okay. I read it back once before I sent it, and let me be straight with you. That was not a surrender. People hear okay and assume it means you are giving up, but mine meant the exact opposite. It meant I was completely done spending my life propping up people who had just decided I was no longer family. For 30 months, I had been bending so we would not break. That morning, they broke it themselves, so I finally stopped holding on. The first thing a person does when they finally stop carrying something heavy is set it down. I happened to be holding much more than they realized. Before lunch, I took back my life, and every bit of it was mine to do. First, the $60,000. That was my hard-earned money in savings, promised as a gift for a house I was no longer welcome in. But the deal had not closed, and a gift you have not given is still yours. I emailed Dale Pewitt one clean sentence. Please be advised, I am withdrawing my offered down payment contribution effective immediately. After that, I confirmed with my bank that not $1 had moved. Second, the trust. As trustee, I refused to be rushed into selling the back 40 under a deadline I never agreed to. I did the opposite of rushing. I started the process correctly. I formally noticed the appraisal, logged the request, and sent the file. I declined to authorize any sale until that process was fully complete. That is not a weapon. That is a trustee doing her actual job, the slow, careful way the law expects. But to people counting on my speed, slow lands like a slammed door. The trust was locked. Not out of spite, but locked the way a vault is locked when the responsible person stops being talked into leaving it open. Their house deal was now on life support. Without my $60,000 and without trust money, the numbers on Cedar Street did not add up and never had. I want to be honest about the feeling. It was not triumphant. The feeling was quiet and cold, like the first hard frost after a long, warm fall, the one that finally kills the thing you have been nursing all season. I closed my laptop, unlocked my shop, and turned the sign to open. I brewed fresh coffee to replace the cup I had let go cold. I had a feed store payroll due by 3 p.m. Life, unlike family, keeps its appointments. I had put my phone on silent to run the numbers, and when I flipped it over, the screen looked like a slot machine of bad news. 46 missed calls. 31 from my dad, 9 from an unknown number, the rest from Sharon, and a text from Dale Pewitt sent at 9:52 a.m. It read, "Yolanda, we have a serious problem. Call me before you do anything else." I set the phone face down. A serious problem. Dale was not wrong, exactly. He just had the ownership of it backward. See, a man who tells his daughter not to come back 12 hours before he needs her $60,000 and her signature to close a deal has a real crisis. It is just not the crisis he thinks it is, and it definitely is not mine. I finished Mrs. Albright's tax forms, double-checked her withholding, and clipped the copies. I walked her to the door, telling her to say hi to her grandkids. Then I poured more coffee and looked at that text. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like I could breathe all the way to the bottom. 46 calls in 3 hours. They had discovered all at once how much of their plan rested on a person they threw out at dawn. I scrolled through the missed call log, scanning top to bottom, the way you scan a ledger for the entry that is throwing everything off. There it was. The timestamps marching down the screen. Panic in numbers, which is the only language I really trust. I did not call Dale back, and I was not going to do anything on his timeline. The only thing I did was call my own lawyer, not Dale. Dale was my father's man, paid by him, looking out only for him. There is nothing wrong with that, except people in Harmon's Mill have a habit of forgetting whose lawyer is whose. I needed someone in my corner. Gwen Hollis had drawn up my mother's trust in the back room of an old feed mill. My mom had signed it in blue ink, laughing about how official it felt. Gwen was 60, gray-braided, and totally allergic to nonsense. I drove over and laid it all out plain. The dinner, the voicemail, the $60,000 I withdrew, and the appraisal I noticed. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands. "Let me tell you where you stand," she said. "The money was yours. You can decide not to give a gift right up until it leaves your account. Nobody can force you." She tapped the trust binder. "As trustee, you are required to proceed carefully. That is the job. A court will not second-guess you for following your mother's intent." Then Gwen paused, and something crossed her face. Not worry, more like a memory. "There is something else," she said. "Your mother left a sealed side letter with us, with her own written instructions. She told us to release it only if a dispute ever came up over the land." Gwen looked at me over her glasses. "It looks like there is a fight over the land now." My mouth went dry. "What is in it?" "I never opened it," Gwen said. "It had my mother's handwriting on the front, just my name." She slid it across the desk, but I did not pick it up. Not yet. I will come back to that letter later, and you will see why it mattered that I waited. First, Sharon came to my shop. She did it on a Friday at lunch, right when she knew the place would be full of people. The bell over the door jingled, and there Sharon was, wearing a coat far too nice for our town. She started raising her voice before she even reached my counter. "Well, here she is," she announced to the room. "The daughter who abandoned her grieving father over a piece of dirt." 3 of my clients were sitting in the waiting chairs, the feed store manager and 2 ladies from the Methodist church. Every one of them stopped pretending not to listen. "Hi, Sharon," I said. "Can I help you?" "You can sign the papers," she snapped, planting herself in the middle of my shop. "You are tearing this family apart. Your mother would be ashamed of you. This is our family now, and you are shutting us out of our own home." There it was again, that line she loved best. I walked around the counter slowly and held the door open for her. "I have got clients," I said. "If you want to talk, Gwen Hollis can set up a meeting with the lawyers present." Sharon's face went blotchy. She swept out, the bell jingling behind her. I turned back to my waiting room. Mrs. Tilden, who had buried 2 husbands and feared no one, looked at me. "Your mama would not be ashamed of you, baby," she said. "She would be proud." Small towns talk, so I let them. By Sunday, half the county had heard Sharon's version. By Monday, the other half had heard Mrs. Tilden's. My dad's calls changed shape after that. He stopped demanding and started grieving at me, which is much harder to hold a line against. My dad left a voicemail Sunday night, his voice cracking in the middle. "You are killing this family, Yolanda," he said. "Your mother would be ashamed." I sat on my kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, and listened twice. I will not lie to you and say it bounced off. It did not. There is no part of you so well defended that your father saying your dead mother would be ashamed of you does not find a soft spot and press. I wanted to call him and fix it, the way I had fixed everything since I was 20. But running other people's books for 10 years taught me something. When your hands are shaking, you do not make the entry from memory. You go to the source document. So, I did not call. I got up off the floor, pulled out the trust, and read in my mother's plain language exactly what my job was. It steadied me better than any pep talk could have. I was not being cruel. I was being correct. Those are very different things, no matter how loud someone insists they are the same. I texted my dad one line. "I love you, but I am still following Mom's trust." He did not answer. I know that feeling when the people who hurt you flip it around and call you the cruel one. If you have ever been guilted for holding a line, this story is for you. Stay with me. The part where it turns is coming. Hit subscribe so you do not lose the ending. While I was holding my line, their whole plan was quietly catching fire. I want to be fair about how it happened. Without my $60,000 and without trust money, my dad and Sharon were short, badly short, on a house they had already promised to buy. The sellers, a retired couple moving to Florida, had a backup offer and no patience. Their agent sent Dale a letter. Close on the 18th as agreed, or forfeit the $15,000 in earnest money and face a claim for costs. $15,000. My dad did not have that lying around. Almost none of it was ever his money anyway. It was supposed to be the land's money and mine. I heard the worst from Aunt Bee, my mother's younger sister. "He is not sleeping," she told me over the phone. "He sits on the porch half the night with the radio off." Sharon was at my dad all day about the money, while Brett just ate and complained. You and I both know that heavy, suffocating feeling when family demands your sacrifice. I felt that old pull, the one that had run my life for 30 months. My father was suffering, and I had the checkbook. But sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee, I finally realized I hadn't caused this mess. They spent money they never had on a promise they stole from him before throwing him away at 6 a.m. A frost doesn't kill a healthy plant. It just finishes off what was too weak. I told Aunt Bee I wasn't signing. She paused, then said, "Good." And she meant it. When Gwen called me on a Wednesday asking me to read the letter, she knew I'd been avoiding it. "You don't have to," she said. "But my mother, Carol, wrote it for this exact moment." It felt wrong to leave her talking to an empty room, so I drove over after closing my shop. The letter sat on Gwen's desk, a plain white envelope with soft, worn corners from sitting in a file for 4 years. Seeing my name on the front in my mom's slanted, careful hand brought back a flood of memories. The same hand from my childhood lunch bags and report cards. I picked it up, but couldn't open it yet. "Why did she think there'd be a fight?" I asked. Gwen took off her glasses, looking at me gently. "Your mother was sick, Yolanda, not blind. She knew your father." Gwen explained that Mom loved him, but knew exactly what he'd do if he got lonely and let the wrong person get in his ear. She nodded at the envelope, telling me Mom wasn't protecting the land from him, but protecting him from himself, and she chose me to do it. My mother had been dead for 2.5 years, yet she still wasn't done talking. I sat in the chair where she had signed her trust, turning the envelope over in my hands. Outside, the streetlights on Main Street flickered on. I thought about everyone who had spent the last month telling me what my mother would think of my choices. Sharon, my dad, half the church. Now, here was Mom herself, ready to weigh in. My thumb finally found the seal. I opened it slowly, the way you peel a bandage you know is stuck. Just one page, written on both sides in faded blue ink. She started with no fuss. Yola Bug, if Gwen is giving you this, then it has happened, and I am so sorry I am not there to take the heat with you. I had to stop and breathe before I could go on. Then she explained her decision. I didn't make you trustee because you are the smart one, though you are. I made you trustee because you're the only one in this family who can say no to your father and still love him in the same breath. He can't say no to himself, and someday someone will want this land turned into cash. They'll get to him when he is weak, and he will convince himself it's what we all want. It won't be. Mom wrote about a secret she had never shared. Her own mother had lost her daddy's farm the exact same way. A second husband with a sweet smile, and a deed signed at a kitchen table before anyone could stop it. Mom was only 9 years old when they had to rent rooms, and her mother grieved that lost ground until the day she died. I made you trustee so you'd be the one standing where nobody stood for her, the letter read. Keep the place whole, baby. Not for the dirt, but for the next generation who will need a place that didn't get sold off in a bad season. She wrote that if they ever tell me I am not family, that is the day I will know she was right to choose me. Real family doesn't cast you out for doing the job they trusted you with, so she told me never to feel guilty. The letter ended with, "You're not the one who left." I read those words 3 times in silence. As I sat there, the heavy weight crouched in my chest for 30 months finally stood up and walked away. I had never known about my grandmother's farm. Mom carried that quiet loss her whole life without ever saying a word to me. She had been terrified of this happening again for years. She wasn't a fortune teller, but she recognized the shape of the threat because she had watched it destroy her own mother's life. She hadn't just been practical when she appointed me as trustee. She was handing me a backbone and a sacred purpose. I folded the paper and slipped it into my breast pocket, right over my heart. I whispered, "Okay, Mom." This time, the word meant something brand new to me. With her letter tucked safely in my pocket, I finally let Gwen translate Dale's threats into plain English. She read his texts and his stiff letter, nearly laughing. "He's blowing smoke," she said, explaining that his claims of me interfering with the sale were completely wrong. She held up one finger. The $60,000 was a personal gift I hadn't made, and keeping my own money isn't interference. Then she raised a second finger. As trustee, refusing to rush a sale while following the appraisal process required by the trust document isn't a breach of fiduciary duty. It is actually the exact opposite. Gwen pointed out that I'd be in trouble if I had signed the land away in a weekend to make my dad's girlfriend happy. She set the paperwork down. The real problem, Yolanda, is that Dale let his client sign a contract spending money he didn't have and was never promised in writing. That's a serious problem. But it is entirely their issue, and maybe Dale's malpractice carrier's problem. It is not yours at all. I let that sink in. So, when Dale claims we have a serious problem, He really means they do, and he's hoping you won't know the difference, so you will panic and sign. I had spent 10 years in business watching people try to make numbers disappear just by sounding confident. In my business, I knew that never works. Numbers don't care how sure your voice is, and neither does a trust document. I had Gwen send Dale a brief reply, just 3 lines, no heat. It said I had nothing to discuss outside a meeting with counsel present, and that I was simply following the trust. A dispute like this never stays between 4 people in a small town. It split our family like a crack running through a windshield. Aunt Bee was with me from day one, which helped more than she knew. She showed up at my shop with coffee, a casserole, and a memory. "You know your mama planted those oaks along the back 40 the year you were born," she told me. "She said there was one for you." Aunt Bee reminded me how Mom would come back from chemotherapy, too exhausted to stand, yet still ask if anyone had watered those trees. She set the casserole on my counter. "Your mother didn't just hand you that land, Yolanda. She handed you a backbone, so use it." On the other side, my Uncle Ray called to tell me I was breaking my father's heart, and that blood was thicker than paperwork. I told him blood was exactly why I was being so careful, and he hung up on me. Even the ladies at the Methodist church split right down the middle. It would have been funny if it hadn't been my actual life. But I noticed that the people who knew my mother best, who watched her work that land and fight her disease, stood by me without me asking. On the flip side, the ones who had only heard Sharon's spun version of the story lined up right behind her. But truth has a long memory in a small town like ours. People who had known Carol Doyle for 30 years weren't about to believe she raised a daughter who had put her own father out in the cold out of pure spite. They knew better. They knew her, and they were about to find out exactly how much like her I had turned out to be. When the guilt trips and the ugly town gossip failed, they reached for the only heavy lever they had left. Dale Pruitt sent a formal letter on his legal letterhead, the kind designed to make your stomach drop. It claimed my father was going to petition the court to remove me as trustee for breaching my duties. My brother Brett took a picture of that letter and posted it on Facebook with the caption, "Getting our land back." Some people forget who family is. It got 40 likes, and a cousin commented with clapping hands. I read that threat twice, and my pulse spiked because the word court terrifies anyone, even when you are in the right. I did what I always do. I took it straight to Gwen. She read it slowly, then set it down with a look of quiet satisfaction. "Now they've actually shown us their hand," she said, telling me this was good news. It didn't feel good, but she reminded me that feelings are not filings. She told me to sit down so she could explain how removing a trustee actually works, because it's nothing like what Dale's scary letter implies. I sat there as a truck rumbled past, hauling seed corn. I had the steadiest feeling, like I've been walking on thin river ice for a month and finally felt my boot hit solid ground. If you have ever been accused of tearing your family apart because you refuse to be their doormat, comment boundaries so I know you're out there with me. Stick around because what happens next at that lawyer's table is the whole reason I wanted to tell this story. Gwen explained that to remove a trustee, you have to go to court and prove actual cause: bad faith, self-dealing, wasting assets, or ignoring the document. She ticked them off on her fingers, then looked directly at me. "Now tell me, Yolanda, did you take a single dime of that trust money for yourself?" "No," Gwen said, looking right at me. "Did you sell anything, lose anything, or hide anything?" "No." "Did you follow your mother's trust instructions and order a proper appraisal?" "Yes." She spread her hands. "Then there is nothing they can remove you for. Anyone can file a petition. That part is cheap, and your father is free to try. But winning is a different animal. No judge is going to remove a trustee for being careful. He will just wonder why they are in such a hurry to sell land that is not even theirs. She leaned back. Here is the part Dale is banking on you not understanding. That $15,000 they are about to lose? That is on them because they signed a contract relying on funds that were never committed in writing. Your declining a gift and following the process did not create their problem, Gwen said. Their problem was baked in the day they spent money they did not have. Her words landed clean, like an accounting column that finally balances after you have hunted the error for an hour. For a month, I had carried a heavy dread that maybe I was the villain for refusing to sign. But looking at the ledger, my side balanced. Theirs did not. So what do I do? I asked. You offer them a fair way out, she replied. On the record, not because you owe them, but because it is right. And when they turn it down, and they will, no one in this county will doubt who was reasonable. I liked that. It sounded exactly like something my mother would have done. So I had Gwen send over a fair path in writing. I want you to hear this because this is the part people skip in a revenge story, and it is what matters most. I did not want to ruin my father. I wrote that I would consider a partial sale of the acreage, not the home place and never my mother's oaks, but a defined back parcel at a proper appraised value. I even agreed that some proceeds could fund suitable housing for my father, which was within my discretion if done right. I asked for exactly 2 things in return. First, a real, unhurried appraisal. Second, that the talk of disowning me and removing me as trustee must stop. You cannot expel someone in the morning and expect her cooperation by night. That is just common sense. That is not a punishment. It is just how reality works. Gwen sent our proposal over, and we heard back within a single day. The answer did not come from my father. It came from Sharon, funneled through Dale, and it was a flat, cold no. There was no counteroffer, no invitation to talk, just a rejection. Dale wrote that his clients would not accept conditions dictated by Miss Doyle. Conditions. Think about that. I had offered to fund a new home for my dad and arrange a fair appraisal, and the only condition they could not stomach was being asked to stop telling the town that I was no longer family. That response told me everything. This fight was never really about the land or even the money. It was about whether they could force me to kneel. I read their rejection twice, and instead of the dread I had carried all month, I felt almost light. Now I knew for certain that I had done right by everyone, and they had chosen to say no to what was fair. Dale called a meeting himself just 3 days before the closing date he was about to blow. He framed it as a chance to resolve things before they got out of hand. In lawyer speak, that means, my client is about to lose $15,000 and I need you in a room. He said it at his office, on his turf, Thursday at 10. He likely pictured me walking in scared and alone, ready to sign anything to make the noise stop. I told Gwen yes, but I wanted her beside me, 5 minutes early, with our file in perfect order. You do not have to go, Gwen reminded me. I know, I said, but I want to. I had a reason for going that I could not quite say out loud yet. Some deep part of me needed to sit in a room with all of them, under the bright lights with witnesses present, and let the truth stand up by itself without anyone yelling. For 30 months, I had managed this family in private. Quiet phone calls, careful texts, signatures on kitchen tables. Just once, I wanted everything out in the open, on the record, where it could not be twisted into a lie by Sunday morning. They built this scheme assuming I would never force them to say it to my face, believing I was too soft and too afraid of being the bad daughter. They set the table for a girl like that, but they forgot whose name was actually on the deed. On Wednesday night, I laid out my best navy blazer, ready to face them. I slipped my mother's final letter into the breast pocket of that blazer, making sure it was secure. My dad called late that night, close to 11. I almost did not answer, but he was still my father, and some doors you keep a hand on even when you have decided never to walk through them again. "Yola," he said, his voice completely wrecked. "I do not know how we got here." For a second, it was just him again. The man who taught me to drive a stick shift in the church parking lot. The man who wept at my mother's grave until Aunt Bee had to walk him to the car. "I miss your mother every single day," he whispered, his breath hitching. "I just need this to close. We have got nothing if it does not." And God help me, I felt it. The grief under his anger was real. He was not a monster. He was a lonely man who had let someone steer him off a cliff and was only now feeling the air go by. I almost softened. Then he kept talking. "If you had just signed it the first time," he said, and the wreckage in his voice firmed into something older and meaner. "You did this, Yolanda. You put us here." And there it was. Not an apology, but a bill made out to me for a debt that was entirely his. He had reached for my soft spot, found it, and pressed. It was the same as his voicemail, just slower. I closed my eyes. "I love you, Dad," I said. "I will see you at 10. I hung up before he could find another soft place to hurt. I sat in the dark with my mother's letter in my hand, then hung my navy blazer on the door and finally went to bed. I slept better than I had in a month. I want to tell you what calm actually is, because people get it wrong. They think calm is when nothing is going wrong. It is not. Calm is what is left when you have already made your decision. Thursday morning, I got up early and prepped my file the way I do for any hard meeting. Clean, ordered, no surprises to fumble. The trust instrument was tabbed, the appraisal notice dated. I had my one-line email withdrawing the $60,000 with the timestamp showing it was sent before any closing. Gwen's summary of the law was ready. In my breast pocket, not the file, was my mother's letter. That was not evidence for a lawyer. It was ballast for me. I was not going to read it aloud. I just needed it there so my hands would stay still. I made coffee but did not drink a drop of it. I checked the file 3 times, the way my mom checked the truck's oil before a long drive. She did not do it because she doubted the engine, but because checking was her way of saying a prayer. I looked at myself in the hall mirror. Navy blazer, no makeup, the same face that does payroll at the feed store, and said out loud to the empty room, "You are not going there to win. You are going there to be done." It is a different errand. Winning is loud, needs an audience, and never fills you up. Being done is quiet. It only needs the truth and a door to walk out of. For 2.5 years, I had tried to win my family back, one favor at a time. This Thursday, I was not going to win anything. I was going to set the whole heavy burden down on Dale Pewett's conference table and walk away. I picked up my keys. The drive to Dale's office was only 4 minutes, and I made every one of them count. His conference room had a long table, trying way too hard, polished dark wood, and a bowl of mints nobody ever ate. When Gwen and I walked in at 5 till 10, the room was already fuller than I expected, and I saw that Dale had stacked the deck. My father sat at the far end, looking smaller than I remembered, his hands flat on the table. Sharon was beside him in a bright red blazer, her chin up, her eyes already hot. My brother Brett slouched against the wall with his arms crossed, just there for the show. Dale sat at the head of the table, reading glasses slid down his nose, a thick folder squared in front of him, accompanied by two people I had not expected to see at this meeting. One was a young bank loan officer in a gray suit, and the other was a brisk woman with a leather portfolio who was the seller's agent. I clocked them in a second, and a strange calm settled in me. Dale had made a mistake. He thought he was bringing pressure, but he actually brought witnesses. He guaranteed that whatever got said in this room would happen in front of people with no reason to lie about it later. I sat where Gwen pointed, halfway down, where I could see everyone. The ceiling fan turned slow. Somewhere, a clock ticked. Sharon stared at me the way she had stared across that pot roast dinner, measuring my resolve. My dad would not look at me at all. Dale cleared his throat, using that heavy tone men use when they want the room to know they are in charge of it. Dale slowly opened his thick leather folder and sighed. "Well," he said, "let us see if we can talk some sense into things." He peered over his reading glasses straight at me, not at my lawyer, Gwen, but directly at me. It was that dismissive look you reserve for the weakest person at the table. "Yolanda," he said, "you have created quite a situation." He laid his words out like a closing argument to a jury he was certain he already owned. He slid a stapled document across the table toward me. "Your father and Sharon entered a binding agreement in good faith. You, as trustee, undermined it by withdrawing your committed contribution at the 11th hour. You have exposed this family to $15,000 in lost earnest money." He let that accusation hang in the heavy air. "Now, we can resolve this cleanly today," Dale continued, "if you will authorize the parcel sale and reinstate your contribution. Otherwise, we proceed with the petition to remove you as trustee. And frankly, Yolanda, that is not a fight you want." Sharon nodded along like a metronome. Brett smirked, while the young bank officer stared down at his hands. The seller's agent watched with the flat patience of someone billing by the hour. In front of me was the same sale agreement from our pot roast dinner, the signature line still glaringly empty. Dale folded his hands and waited for me to show fear. Above us, the ceiling fan ticked, and Sharon's polished nail began a slow, impatient tap on the table, as if she were already counting the money. I want you to picture this for a moment. The entire room felt like it was tilting toward me, heavy with silent pressure. With all those hostile eyes on me, the easiest thing in the world would have been to just grab the pen and make it all stop. A month ago, I probably would have. But I had a letter in my pocket from a woman who had seen this exact morning coming 4 years before it arrived. So, I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I grabbed my own clean folder, set it on the table, and opened it slowly. "I am not going to authorize the sale today," I said, my voice incredibly level. I watched Dale lean in, thinking my soft tone meant I was caving. I laid the first page where the bank officer and the agent could see it. "This is my mother's trust," I said. "I am the trustee. It requires an appraisal and formal notice before any sale of this land. I ordered the appraisal and I gave the notice. I have not sold, and I have not refused to sell. I have simply declined to skip the steps this document requires. That is not a breach of duty. That is just doing my job. I laid down the second page. This is the $60,000. It was my personal money, a gift I offered but had not yet given. I withdrew that offer in writing on the morning of the 16th, before any closing, before anything was committed on paper. I looked up at Dale, keeping my voice perfectly steady. You cannot interfere with a sale by keeping your own money in your own bank account, Dale. You went to law school. You know that. Gwen spoke up, quiet and dry. A trustee following the trust and a private citizen declining to make a gift are both acting entirely within their rights, Gwen said, her tone sharp. There is no cause for removal here. They can file if they want to waste their money, but a court will not act on it. The bank officer started to nod before catching himself, and the agent stopped taking notes to just listen. I turned the last page toward the middle of the table. Here is the real problem, I said. Somebody signed a purchase contract for $240,000, spending money that was not his, money that was never committed in writing. When that money did not appear, the contract was always bound to collapse. That is not something I did to you, I said, letting the words land as gently as setting down a full cup of tea. That is something you did to yourselves, and then you drove 12 miles into town to blame it on me. Dale's face turned the deep red of a lawyer whose closing argument had just become the other side's evidence. He opened his mouth, but Sharon beat him to it. She stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. You ungrateful little... She stopped, but only halfway. Her smooth facade was gone, her face twisted and her words shaking. Your father raised you, and the second he needs help, you slam the door and hide behind your dead mother and your paperwork. She slapped her hand flat on the table, hard enough to rattle the mints. Your mother is dead, Yolanda. She is dead. This is our family now, and you are not going to ruin it. There it was. The third time she had said that to me, the loudest and the last. The room went dead silent. The bank officer froze, and the seller's agent kept her pen suspended above the page. My father finally looked up, and I held his eyes, completely ignoring Sharon. I did not stand or raise my voice. That is what made the room turn. She was on her feet, shaking, and I was sitting perfectly still. You are right, I said. My mother is gone. I know. I was there. I paused. And that is exactly why her trust answers to me and not to you. She wrote it that way on purpose while she was alive. She wrote it in her own words, because she knew this day was coming. Sharon's mouth worked, but nothing came out. I turned to my dad, keeping my voice as soft as a hand on a shoulder. I had waited 2.5 years to say this to him. You left me a voicemail, I said. You told me I was out. You said to move on without me. I let the next part come gently, the only way a truth like this should ever land. So I did, Dad. I moved on. You cannot put your family out at 6 o'clock in the morning and still expect to own her at 10 o'clock. He did not have an answer. There was none. Brett had stopped smirking and was staring at his shoes. Sharon stood frozen in her red blazer, breathing hard. Seeing Sharon realize she had been the loudest voice in a room she had already lost, I offered them a way out one last time, right in front of the witnesses Dale had gathered. Here is where we are, I said, sliding my written offer to the center of the table. It was the same one they had rejected before. I will fund suitable housing for my father out of a proper, appraised partial sale, handled through the trust the way my mother required. The home place and the Oaks stay. And any talk about me not being family stops today. I looked around the table at each of them. It is the same offer I made last week. It is fair, and frankly, it is probably more than you would ever get from a judge. Take it, I said, and we all go home lighter. The room waited. The bank officer actually leaned forward. For 1 second, I thought my father might reach for it. Then Sharon, who could not let me be the reasonable one, said tight and low, "We are not taking conditions from her." Given the chance to choose his daughter or his pride, my father looked down at the table and said nothing. That silence was its own choosing. The deal was dead, and their $15,000 was gone. The Cedar Street house would belong to backup buyers by Friday. They had done this to themselves. Dale shuffled his pages, his folder suddenly just paper. If they tried to remove me now, they would be filing on nothing, and they knew it. With 2 neutral witnesses sitting there, I gathered my files, slow and neat, and tapped them square on the table. I stood up. I did not slam anything, I did not gloat, and I did not say a word about winning, because I had not come to win. At the door, I turned just once to look at the people who had told me I was out. I gave them the same word I had given them that morning in the truck, the one they thought meant I was beaten. "Okay," I said, and then I walked out. The parking lot was bright after that dim room, filled with the kind of clean spring light that makes everything look freshly washed. Gwen came out behind me, pulling on her gloves. She did not say anything for a second, which, from her, was the ultimate compliment. Then she said, "Your mother would have liked that." I got into my truck, the same cab where I had heard that painful voicemail a month before, and sat there with my hands on the wheel, the letter still safe in my pocket. I waited to feel sad, and some of it came. You do not watch your father choose his pride over you and feel nothing. But mostly, I felt light all the way down, like finally setting down a weight I had carried so long I forgot it was there. I drove back to my shop, to the work that never told me I was not family. Here is how it shook out in the plain numbers I trust more than feelings. The Cedar Street deal collapsed. My father and Sharon lost their $15,000 in earnest money, and they got a bill from the seller's lawyer on top of it. The house in town never happened. Once Dale had a few days to think, he talked them out of filing that petition to remove me. He knew better than anyone there was no legal cause to stand on. Today, the 160 acres, the farmhouse, and my mother's row of oaks are still completely whole. They remain in the trust, doing exactly what she wanted. My father still lives in that farmhouse, by the way. The trust provides for him, and I never touch that support, because being fair to him was always part of my job, even on the morning he forgot to be fair to me. Sharon and Brett moved out by the end of summer. You and I both know people who only stay for the porch, and her marriage did not survive the winter without the new house she was promised. Aunt Bee still brings me casseroles I do not need, but she brings the gossip I actually do. The Methodist ladies have started coming around again, the way small towns do once the truth has had a season to settle. My dad and I talk now and then, short calls on my terms, keeping the door open just a crack. It is not what it was, but my books balance, and I finally sleep through the night. The land my mother trusted me to keep safe is secure for whoever needs it next. If there is one thing to take from this, it is that when someone mistakes your calm for weakness, you do not have to yell. Calm is just what strength looks like once it is already decided. If this reminded you that boundaries are not cruelty, share this video, subscribe, and I will see you next time.